Good evening, America. Good morning, Australia. It's back. You're back with your host, Toni Lontis, on Radio Toni. And where it was a balmy 28 to 30 degrees, singlets, thongs and shorts kind of weather. And back here in my lovely little valley, it's frosty mornings and minus digits, and I'm freezing. So I'm sitting here speaking to you in my Ugg boots and tracky dacks and a couple of coats and thinking, where's Barley gone? So, hello to our wonderful rebel in the background, making sure I sound wonderful today. And since I'm back with Barley, I'm going to return to my usual world news. Later today, I'll be telling you about our wonderful guest. And before I do, if you want to jump on the website, w4wn.com, and send us questions for our guests today. If you want to jump on our website and check out me, I'm tonilontis.com, TONILONTIS.com. You can follow me or message me on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Instagram. And so, what's making world news this little week? And since I've missed, there's quite a lot been happening in our world. Astrologers have found an exoplanet so rare that they've deemed it the forbidden planet. Technically known as NGTS-4b, the planet is 3 times the size of Earth, 20% smaller than Neptune. The planet has its own atmosphere, and it is hotter than Mercury with a temperature of 1,832 degrees Fahrenheit. So that's interesting. Obviously not habitable to humans. Over to the Mediterranean, where a luxury super yacht owned by an Italian billionaire was lost at sea after it slipped from a cargo ship into the Mediterranean. I'd hate to be that ship's captain having to tell the owner that his yacht, the 40-metre My Song, custom sailing yacht owned by a fashion hair, and being transported between the Spanish island of Majorca and the Italian city of Genoa, was lost at sea. The media reports are also supported by maritime tracking data. The US currently believes that Russia may be conducting low-level nuclear testing in violation of the moratorium on such tests. Negotiated in the 1990s, the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty enjoys worldwide global support, but has yet to be ratified by 8 remaining nuclear technology states, and they include Israel, Egypt, and the United States. So I find it interesting that the United States would be commenting on nuclear testing by Russia when they haven't indeed signed the treaty. Over to Missouri, where the state is the first to be without an abortion clinic. Its sole licensed centre is being forced to close after the introduction of this new draconian law banning abortion. The family planning charity spokesman Dr. Lena Wen warned that politicians are passing law after law to intimidate women, including laws that would allow women to be investigated for miscarriages. It's a step back in time when, despite whether you're for or against abortion, where the government controls what can happen in a woman's body. Over to San Diego, where a San Diego hospital revealed the birth of a girl believed to be the world's smallest surviving baby, who weighed just 245 grams. That's about 8.6 ounces. The baby, named Sabi, was born at 23 weeks. Sabi's daddy was told that he had about an hour with her and that she was going to pass away. That hour turned into 2 hours, which turned into a day, which turned into a week. Sabi spent 5 months in the neonatal intensive care unit before going home weighing a healthy 5 pounds or 2 kilos. over to the Danube River in Hungary's capital of Budapest, where 7 South Korean tourists died and at least 19 are missing in a boat capsized after unseasonal heavy rainfall, which has swollen the Danube River. The rain has led to strong currents in the Danube, and even though it's a popular drawcard for tourists, the capsizing of the boat has halted procedures temporarily. 3 more US Democrats have called for the impeachment of the embattled President Trump after Special Counsel Robert Mueller made his first public remarks. On Wednesday, Mr. Mueller said that his investigation had not exonerated Mr. Trump. So let's repeat that. Mr. Mueller said his investigation had not exonerated President Trump on obstruction of justice. Mr. Mueller was tasked with investigating Russian interference into the 2016 presidential election. But he said charging a sitting president with a crime was not an option. The issue of impeachment has divided the Democratic Party. And so far, they have resisted the idea, arguing that it would be counterproductive, and I kind of think that it would be to impeach a sitting president. In Israel, Israeli lawmakers have voted to dissolve parliament after the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu failed to form a coalition government. The vote triggered a fresh election, which will be held on the 17th of September. Mr. Netanyahu was unable to reach a deal with the fresh right-wing coalition following last month's election. And it centres around an impasse related to the military conscription bill governing exemptions for ultra-Orthodox Jewish seminary students, which I dare say will continue. In the first time in Israel's history that a Prime Minister designate has failed to form a coalition. There seems to be a lot of interesting politics around the world in relation to elections and sitting presidents/prime ministers. Further to some of the US's controversial anti-abortion laws, and Bob Iger from the CEO of Disney has said that it's becoming increasingly difficult to continue filming in the state of Georgia. Blockbusters like Black Panther and the Avengers Endgame were shot in the state recently due to its generous tax breaks for film productions. However, Mr. Iger said many people who work for us will not work in Georgia, and that will mean that the Disney films are no longer able to be filmed there. Early this month, Georgia's Republican Governor Brian Kemp signed the so-called Heartbeat Bill, which would ban abortions as early as 6 weeks into pregnancy. In further news, in London, Julian Assange is set to face a London court via video link today amid reports his health has deteriorated so severely in prison that he can hardly hold a conversation. WikiLeaks said in a statement that it had grave concerns about the condition of its founder, who has been moved to the health ward of Belmarsh prison. The Australian computer programmer was arrested at London's Ecuadorian embassy in April after spending 7 years holed up there to avoid charges against him. WikiLeaks said his health significantly deteriorated during this time, under conditions that were incompatible with basic human rights. In Beijing, it has dropped a bombshell in its escalating trade war with the United States. With one shot, it could shoot down the entire F-35 stealth fighter production programs, which would cripple Silicon Valley, and could also send Apple into administration. In Indonesia, a tiny Indonesian village called Bangan, a photographer has made a worrying discovery about the rubbish that surrounds the island. Among the piles of waste, the photographer saw items from everyday Australians that everyday Australians would recognise in a heartbeat. The bright packaging of Coles and Woolworths products standing out like sore thumbs. His incredible pictures from the village of East Java show a flattened Woolies full cream milk carton and a discarded yellow Coles basmati rice packet, both being thousands of kilometres from Australia and concealed among recyclable paper scraps. Currently across the world, there are 7 major outbreaks of measles. Measles is a disease that can kill, but is preventable by vaccines. A widespread vaccination program has been successful at reducing the number of cases around the world, but the virus continues to occur in pockets. It is extremely contagious. The experts saying that the virus can linger in a room for several hours after an infected person has left. So you can have the measles virus and not know you're actually about to come down with measles. So that's concerning in itself. While it remains a problem in some developing countries due to their healthcare systems, it is also on the rise in the West. And this is thought in part due to the anti-vaccination movement and suspicion over the effects of immunisation. Back to the US, where the country has suffered over 500 tornadoes in 30 days, leaving the US battered by twisters. It's a 40-year record broken in 12 days in a row with at least 8 tornado reports. America has been hit by these 500 in the last 30 days, and the severe weather sweeping the US Midwest has injured hundreds and destroyed buildings, prompting areas of the country to be left like a war zone. Over to Bangladesh, where 16 people have been charged over the horrific murder of a teenager burned to death after reporting sexual harassment. The 19-year-old was doused with kerosene and set on fire on the roof of her Islamic school after she refused to withdraw a complaint against her head teacher. She died in hospital 5 days after the April 6th attack, with her death sparking mass protests across Bangladesh. And lastly today in world news, daytime talk show host Ellen DeGeneres has opened up about her sexual abuse she endured as a teenager at the hands of her stepfather. DeGeneres said the reported abuse started when she was 15 or 16, after her mother, Betty, was diagnosed with breast cancer. In an interview with David Letterman, she discussed the abuse and the fact that her mother did not believe her. She said that she was angry with herself because she was weak and did not stand up. It was a really horrible, horrible story, and the only reason that DeGeneres is now going into detail about the situation was so that other girls would speak up and tell someone. So that's really important this morning that anyone who has suffered any form of abuse, tell someone. In the first instance, just tell someone. So before I throw to the break, I just thought I'd tell you about my wonderful guest today, Greg Reed, who authors books under the name of C.T. Mitchell, has 12 Amazon best-selling, is the author of 25 mystery short reads and novels with a thriller edge. He's a recipient of the 2017 Reader's Choice Awards for his novel Murder Street. CT was street-educated, Australian-born, and has travelled the world as a real estate negotiator, encountering many interesting characters, some outright crooks. He brings these experiences as well as a love for mystery thrillers to his writing. So After the break, I'll be introducing you to the wonderful C.T. Mitchell or Greg Reid. Over to you, Rebel. Hello, Greg. How are you?
Tony, I'm feeling absolutely fabulous on this chilly Brisbane morning.
It is rather chilly. It was a bit of a shock this morning, I can tell you, when I woke up. So
well,
I'm just
you
going to
just come
tell
back
our
from
readers.
Bali.
I know the temperature shock's a little dramatic for me. So before I get on talking with Greg about it, I just wanted to tell our readers. Greg Reid publishes his books under the pen name of C.T. Mitchell, and he writes the Detective Jack Creek mysteries, and also is the writer of Cozy Mysteries, that softer crimes solved by a nosy female amateur sleuth, and Lady Margaret Turnbull is the main character in those mysteries. Greg splits his time between Brisbane and Cabarita Beach, and I have to tell our listeners that Cabarita Beach is just south of where we are now, and it's a sleepy seaside village in northern New South Wales, Australia, a very beautiful part of the world. Greg wasn't always as successful as he is today, and he suffered terribly from bullying in his teens, which we'll talk about later. Now, if you want to grab some of Greg's mystery bestsellers, visit his site, www.ctmitchellbooks.com. That's www.ctmitchellbooks.com, and I'll put that link up in the chat at the end of the program. And so it's been an immense pleasure for me to meet and become friends with Greg. His wealth of information about life and publishing books and writing bestsellers has been invaluable to me, and we've actually become really good friends. So, Greg, I'm going to call you Greg in the interview, and know that our listeners, I'll keep saying Greg, but our author today is C.T. Mitchell. So, Greg, where did it all begin?
Tony, I've got to say it probably started very much at an early age. I was born at an early age.
Yes.
And
yes.
So that's a bit of Australian humour for our friends over there in the States. But I always wanted to write books, and subsequently, after procrastinating for about 30 years, I eventually got started, and I began to write. And my mentor within a writing group basically told me that one of the good things I should do is get myself a pen name. So what I did is I tried to think of something that suited the genre, which is mystery crime books, etc.
Yes,
I went for a bit of anonymity by just making a couple of initials so that people couldn't guess whether I was male or female. If I, completely flopped in the old crime, then maybe I could slip across to romance or sci-fi and whatever, and no one would really know. But the name is really the culmination of my three children's names, which are Kelvin, Taylor, and Mitchell. And so the author, C.T. Mitchell, was aboard.
C.T. Mitchell.
Yeah.
Very tricky. So I've got some questions from our wonderful listeners already. The first, what brought you to write? So I think, do you want to expand on that a bit more before we get on to the next questions?
What brought me to writing?
What actually did bring you to write?
So what brought me into writing was basically just that urge, I suppose. I had a little bit of a creative streak, probably from my early days. I used to work in real estate, not necessarily selling a traditional home and whatever. I used to sell property that was not even built. They used to call that off the plan selling. So I had to be creative in how I described things, how I painted the pictures for people. So there was always a little bit of a creative kind of thing in me. I loved writing blog posts, articles, that kind of thing. And it used to be centered around real estate predominantly. But as I said, I wanted to get into writing a book, writing a novel. And I think probably like maybe a lot of the listeners who are on here today, I procrastinated for a long, long time to do that.
Yeah. And then once
So
you got
that
started,
was
you
my
just
start,
kept. Yeah. Another question from a listener: how do you develop your characters?
My characters are probably observations, I suppose, in and around what I've seen. Really, my central characters within the Detective Jack Creed series. I mean, Creed himself is a fairly anti-establishment, 50-something kind of guy that sort of rubs his bosses up the wrong way, which has unfortunately, stifled his promotional activities within the police force, gets him into a fair bit of trouble. Conversely, he's got a partner which is completely the opposite to him. So Jack wouldn't like being seen in a typical police car. He drives a 67 Mustang as his preferred ride. But Jo Boston Wright is his
perfect.
She's
sidekick.
Well, she's the sidekick, but she's also, as I develop my books, becoming fairly dominant also within the series. I mean, she's almost at an equal stage in title stage. In fact, I'm going to be writing a couple more books down the track that will feature Jo as the lead detective, and I'll have Jack maybe out on holidays or something like that while she goes about solving the crime. So she's an important part of the duo.
Really good. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Absolutely.
So she'll come to the forefront a bit more in your continuing writing then.
Yeah, my very next book, which it's in a work mode stage. The working title at the moment is called The Barber.
Yes.
I've got Jack away on some annual leave, and Jo is now in charge, and it's happening again in our good old favourite place, as you and I know, Cabarita Beach.
Excellent.
And Jo's going to be leading that case and solving that particular murder with a few twists along the way, no doubt.
So if Jack's on holidays, does Jo contact Jack at all, or Jack's completely out of the story, do you think?
In the initial stage, Jack's ringing in because he can't help himself. He's one of these guys who can't let go. He's got to check in on things that they're okay. That sort of annoys Jo a bit because she's coming through the ranks. Her skill set has got a lot better. When she first started, she had no experience in murder investigations. But now, if the readers ever get a chance to have a look at my current book, Murder Secret, it is actually Jo Boston Wright is the person who gets the smallest clue that goes on to break the case. So in The Barber, she leads the case. She very rarely will contact Jack at all, except perhaps at the very end of the book.
Excellent. That sounds real. I can't wait to read that one. So one of our listeners is another question. What category is a short read book?
Okay, short reads is part of the Kindle section on your Amazon. So if if to go into Amazon, there's Amazon Store. There's Kindle Store. There are Kindle ebooks, and there's also Kindle short reads. Now, short reads are based on the time it takes to read and also the page count. So there are various sections that start off at 15 minutes, 30 minutes, 1 hour, 90 minutes and 2 hours for a reading time. And that varies anywhere between 15 pages to about 100 pages, for example.
Okay.
So as you write a book and it falls within that category, Amazon, or Amazon Kindle in particular, takes that particular short read and places it within a section. So I might be in the mystery thriller suspense genre at the 90-minute mark or the 2 hour mark. It's a highly competitive market. There are in excess of 800,000 books in those areas. So,
oh, wow.
Yeah.
So your short reads are one of the best short reads for people seeking mystery thriller reads. Am I correct?
Yeah. According to Kindle and whatever.
According to Amazon?
According to Amazon, who've been very generously have given me over a dozen of these have hit number one. on Amazon in America and in the UK in that particular category I've just mentioned, mystery thriller genre, even to the point, and we might discuss this, about selling some very big authors. So I think we probably mentioned that down the track, but it is a great section.
Very impressive, Greg. It must be very satisfying for you to be able to write something that people will readily read. And the idea around short reads is a great one, because people are so time-starved these days, and the ability to zone out for a couple of hours and read a good mystery is a great idea. So I thought this morning too that you're very successful now and have this wonderful life, but it's not always been so. And I know that in your teenage years you had a terrible time with bullying. So I'm wondering if we can just tell our listeners a bit about your bullying in high school, Greg.
Yeah, sure. Let me try and, and set the scene for yourself, set the scene for your listeners.
Yes.
My teenage years were the 1970s. And if you've got any listeners in around that era, they kind of know that it was long hair, tie-dye shirts, flared jeans, rock and roll of Led Zeppelin and the Rolling Stones. Yeah, all those kind of things. And we lived in a very open and free-spirited kind of decade. And I was, at the time, as a teenager, growing up in regional Queensland in a very small country town of about 35,000 people, for example. So we know all the things about that. Everyone in the town knows each other, so to speak.
Yes.
I was the son of a man, obviously my father, who was born just at the end of World War One. He grew up in the Depression. He was orphaned. And he led a very conservative life, and he tried his very best as a family man, and went to uni and failed over and over and over again, and finally got his degree and became an accountant. But he was a stickler for tradition and being whatever. So the conflict came for me, being a son of an older parent, that I didn't conform to the rest of the 1970s ideology. I didn't have long hair. I didn't wear tie-dye shirts. I didn't wear jeans, particularly into the city, and all these kind of things. And I kind of stood out against the rest of my schoolmates. So I left my primary school years at the age of 12 and started my high school at 13 through to 17 with my very best mate in my primary school days sort of overnight turning against me. And he started to get a few little mates of his along the side, and all the little things started, the name calling and all that kind of stuff. Now, in the 1970s, it was unlike today where we had, access to people and counsellors and, talking about these issues because they're so much more prevalent and more in the media today.
Yes.
And, of course, I never had social media or any of those sort of things that I think also fuel bullying and things like that today as well.
Yes.
So it was kind of like, suck it up, boy, get tough, get yourself through it, and, whatever. But it was a relentless thing. It was a daily attack, and it just got worse and worse. And by the time I'd finished my first year of high school and went into the next two, which would for us here in Australia, it's called grade 9, grade 10. It was quite horrific. And there was, being picked on and taunted and name-calling stuff and all those sort of things. And it just, I suppose it upset me to the point that I sort of wanted to give up and walk away. My schooling still went okay, but not peaking as much as even my grade 8 years. The interesting thing came... The interesting thing I think came for me was around the fact that, and I think it's a good message in some ways for bullying today, is that I, after a lot of torment a lot of upset, a lot of tears and crying and all this sort of stuff.
Yes.
Again, which for a boy
Yes.
is not a good image to have either. That's which
Yeah.
obviously fueled more of it.
Yeah.
What I decided to do was that I needed to take the bullies head on, because I
Yes.
thought and probably had discovered that bullies are only people who lack a lot in character themselves. They're not as strong as they make out to be. They need to have a structure
Yes.
around them to make them, prop them up. And they get away by watching you hurt. However, if you
Yes.
turn all that on your ears, as fearful as that is, and I was very fearful of trying to take on a bully, I decided I would make attack. So one day I said, and this again, I said, bullies come in packs. They come in groups because they're not strong enough
They
normally
do.
to take something on. I picked out the leader of the pack, and I just basically said to him, I'll see you around the back of the hall at 3:30, which was after school today, and we're going to sort this out. And I meant we're going to have a fight. So I called the fight. He was all probably,
which was
I don't
very
know,
brave for us.
yeah, I was
very
about probably
brave
14, 15 years old at the time. And I said, I'm going to have this out. This is as simple as that. And I did. He turned up. He had a gang of mates. They were all egging him on and whatever. But here's the interesting thing.
So he didn't turn up by himself?
No. He brought all these other people around. And they were, for want of a better word, the tougher kids at school. These are the kids who could really fight and do well. I mean, in years gone by, a lot of those kids who were stood in that group that day, many of them have ended up in jail for, fighting and crimes and whatever else. But this particular fellow who was all of a sudden the leader, because very quickly I discovered he actually couldn't fight at all. He had no thing behind him. I thought he must have been, in my head, probably a bit like the Fonz maybe. There was always the image he could be tough, but there was no toughness there. So we sort of had a bit of a fight, and let's be honest, I'm no fighter either. So I'm throwing punches that are missing him, and he's throwing punches that are missing me, and we went on and on this for about 5 or 10 minutes, and ultimately, he decided we're going to call this quits. And from that moment onwards, that was the last of the bullying I got for them and that team. It never happened again after that. And it gave me a very strong lesson. I think it's a lesson today. And I said it's harder today because there is social media and people get tormented and whatever. But to confront the bully head on, and I think I've seen a number of YouTube videos on these sort of things. I'm not advocating that people go out and fight and do all that kind of stuff, but you need to stand up for yourself.
No.
You need to believe in yourself and then forcefully, protect yourself in that kind of manner.
Yeah. So luckily, that was a good outcome for you, wasn't it? If it stopped the bullying and improved school life for a little bit longer.
Yeah.
So you left. Sorry, Greg.
No, you're right. Sorry.
So you left school at 15. Am I correct?
No.
Or did you go? You went on to grade 12.
I went on to grade 12, graduated, and that was in, I said, North Queensland. I was obviously, even though the bullying kind of stopped, I was sick of being in a small town. And when I made my applications to go to university, I made that in Brisbane, which is, for our listeners, about 1,800 miles away, 1,000 odd kilometres away. It takes you 20 odd hours to drive in a car. Yeah, I wanted to get a long way from home. So the applications were made purely for Brisbane, and that's where I got in. And I went to uni down here in Brisbane and studied accounting. Back then.
Yeah. But you didn't actually go on to do accounting. You actually went into real estate, didn't you?
Well, I was 3/4 of the way through my accounting degree, and I had got kind of itchy feet. It's something I still suffer a little bit today, this old shiny object kind of thing.
Yes.
And I got a job as a stock share broker. I used to work on the Brisbane Stock Exchange as what they call an operator.
Yeah.
I worked for a company, and I would buy and sell shares on behalf of clients, and we would screen the shares out to Chalky, and he would write it on the board. So all that kind of exciting stuff to a smaller degree that you see on TV about the New York Stock Exchange. I was one of those guys, so-called running around in those funny-looking jackets they have on, screaming out prices. And I thought that was going to be my career. I thought I was going to become an internationally famous businessman in shares or whatever. But when I ran into a bit of difficulty on not being able to sell a particular lady's shares, the boss kind of got a bit annoyed with me, and one day turned up and said, "Don't come back on Monday." So my dream of being, and your listeners won't understand by being in the United States, but by being the Rene Rivkin of share trading, that was over. And I needed to find something else. And so I stumbled into real estate based off the fact that I could earn, 5 times the amount of money I was earning as a share broker. So that's how it all started.
So you've actually stayed in real estate all this time from that time forward, haven't you, Gregor? And so it's interesting to talk about your real estate career, because you've met some shady characters throughout your real estate career, and I thought it might be interesting to tell the listeners some of your shady real estate stories.
Yeah. Okay. It's an interesting kind of part of my life that a lot of people even today say to me, what does it actually take to become a good crime writer? And they have a perception in their head that you need to go to a university, preferred, maybe a big well-known one like Oxford or Yale or Stanford or something in the United States there, and get yourself a PhD, a doctorate in creative writing. And, I think that's probably got advantages, but at least they also think that you've got to have a fairly good command of the English language, know where to put the parentheses and the full stops and the commas. But what I say to people is that if you really want to become a great crime writer, you just need to be able to have worked in real estate. And that when I was in real estate, what I discovered was that criminals are very much like the everyday person. When a criminal needs to go and buy food, they go to the local supermarket, just like the normal person does. When they need to get their internet fixed up, they ring up the internet man and he comes and fixes it up. And when they need to buy, sell, or rent some property, they call a real estate agent. And as a selling agent that I was, what I learned to discover was that I was actually getting like an apprenticeship in crime writing all the time that I was in there. I'll give you one of the really quick stories that helped fuel me. There's several of them, but I'll give you one. Myself and a mate, we set up our own agency in the very early 1980s, and we were fortunate that we used to look after what they call manage a number of small buildings within the Brisbane CBD area, Brisbane Central Business District. Now, one of the buildings was actually owned by a very prominent jeweller in Brisbane. And in the basement of this particular building was a nightclub. And the nightclub was run by, let me make it a generalisation, run by a gentleman of Italian ethnicity. And I love Italians. I love their enthusiasm. But I think you can sort of get the feel of where I might be going here. And he ran this particular nightclub. So the owner of the building said to myself and my mate one day, I need to get some more rent and I need a brand new lease signed on the premises. So we made an appointment with the Italian gentleman. He owned several nightclubs in our town, in our city, and he had one not too far away in a place called Fortitude Valley. So we slipped down there one afternoon to have an appointment. 5:30 in the afternoon, the club hadn't opened, so we were sort of ushered in by a lady, put into a little booth. Now, I don't know. I don't think this guy seemed to pay the lady all that much money because she wasn't wearing hardly any clothes. You can get an idea of what the club was mainly about.
Get a picture.
So we sat there and we waited. She offered us a drink, being polite young boys. Now, we're in our 20s. We're in, I think, probably about 22, 23 years of age.
Yeah.
So we're sitting there. And she offered us a drink. We took Coca-Colas as our drink because we were being polite. We didn't want to spend a lot of money. In hindsight, we probably should have taken triple scotches, but we weren't to know that at the time. The Italian gentleman slipped in by the booth. Very polite man, very smiling, well groomed and whatever. And he basically said to us, "Okay, boys, what are you here for?" And we said, "Listen, we need to get more rent and a brand new lease for the premises uptown." To that, he turned to us and he smiled and he repeated back, "If that's what you need, I'll put a bulldozer through the basement of the building and I'll firebomb it just for good measure." Now, when you and I would say that to each other, Tony, there's probably not a lot of effect because neither of us would believe each other to do that. But when an Italian gentleman who has been extensively named in a royal commission, which is a big investigation for those who are outside this country, are named as a person of severe criminal influence, says that to you, you kind of believe the guy. And to that, we just went a whole shade of white. The blood just completely drained out of our bodies.
Oh, dear.
And we skedoodled out of there really quickly, back uptown, told the owner of the building that there's no... it was frightening.
Yes.
Yeah.
Totally frightening for 20-year-old blokes.
20-year-olds against a man... and I can't... And I'm not saying, and I can't prove this one way... that as a generalisation, the head of one of the major mafia firms, people within this area. So, we went back. We didn't get any more rent, obviously. There was no brand new lease. And on Monday, the rent used to be paid by a bikie who worked for this particular organisation.
Yeah.
And in he came. He was a lovely man. He looked scary, but... very, very polite. His name was David, and he used to always bring the rent in a brown paper bag and put it on our reception counter. Now, we never, ever, ever counted that money in front of him. We just smiled and nodded, and we let him go and said thanks. Of course, we counted before we had to go to the bank and bank the money. But, it was an interesting time, and there are countless stories like that over the time. And it just, I don't know, it fueled my interest as to how these people were and how they ran their businesses, how they ran their organisation. And even today, it's still a fascination for me. But obviously I wouldn't be wanting to tip onto the wrong side of the law either.
No. But the story you're telling our listeners obviously lends itself well to crime and mystery writing. So you've had like a real life apprenticeship for the writing of your mysteries and thrillers effectively, simply by growing up, if you'd like, in real estate. And I'm sure that the characters will... your characters reflect some of those characters from real life, and elements of their personalities are woven into your novels. So that's what makes them so great to read, I'm sure. And those shady characters are what makes the reader keep reading. So we're going to throw to a little break now, and when we come back, we'll be talking some more with Greg. I've got lots more questions for you, so over to you, Rebel, and we'll be back with our listeners with more of CT Mitchell after the break. Over to you, Rebel. And welcome back to our listeners. You're listening to Radio Toni, live across America and the world. Today I'm talking to the wonderful Greg Reid, who authors books under the pen name of CT Mitchell. Greg writes wonderful mystery novels and novellas. And before I get back to my questions for Greg, one of our listeners has popped in a question about our previous segment where we talked to Greg about his teenage bullying and the fact that Greg eventually stood up to his tormentor. And one of our listeners wanted to know, does this work for people in any country? So, Greg, over to you.
I would definitely think it would work for anyone in the country.
Yes, I would have to agree. I would think that standing up to your bully would work anywhere. However, if you can get them one-on-one versus one and many, that would always be better, wouldn't it?
Oh, absolutely. I said a bully works on the perception that they are a big, strong, tough individual. But I said, unfortunately for them, they seem to mask that perception by having people or groups around them. And it's only when you challenge that strength that you find that they're not so strong on the inside after all. So they work on their perception. And as I said, on a more, not comical, but different side, we grew up watching Happy Days, and we grew up watching the Fonz, who never had a fight, because the perception was that he was a great fighter, and even all the baddies wouldn't take him on. But there were points that came very close that almost exposed the Fonz as perhaps a person who wasn't like that. But on the negative side, that's how bullies work. I'm not saying the Fonz was a bully. He was a good guy, obviously. But
no. But bullies have an image of being rough, tough and strong. However, that's not always the case. I'm sure some bullies are rough, tough and strong, but not all of them are.
No. And in today's social media world, social media is such a cruel place that you can hide behind, you can, either, even if you give up your own name on social media, but there's so many people who create false accounts and you don't even know who you're really talking about. And you've got to stand up, and if you can't stand up to somebody who is anonymous, then you either block that person on social media. You close your accounts off. I mean, at the end of the day, what's more important? Your safety, your sanity. You don't need the likes and recognition of others. That's got to come within anyway. And the best relationships that you can ever have with people who are close to you that you can talk with, personally. So. For social media people, I think you just either cut it off.
Yes,
sorry, Toni.
yes, and it is important to talk to someone if you're experiencing bullying of any description, either on the internet or in real life. You need to tell someone that this is happening to you. So.
Yeah. It's one of the sort of, because of my background, it's also one of the things in Australia, we have an organisation here called the Are You OK program. There's a special Are You OK day. I take part of my monthly sales that I do with my books, and I set that aside and I make donations to charities, in particular that one, which is the Are You OK day. I had the great pleasure of meeting the president not so long ago, a guy called Kamal Sharma, and he's a fabulous ambassador for that, and it's such a great thing. And we also, I also look at other organisations like Kids helpline, because there's so many kids today,
Yes.
like I went through in the 70s. As I said, it was different for me. I didn't have all those extra torments around of social media and all that other stuff. It was very real, of course, but the Kids Helpline here in Australia is a sensational group that allows young kids who are experiencing problems not to be able to have a chat to mum or dad or whatever, but chat to somebody on a equal kind of a level to them, and they can dial in. And I forget the statistics, but it's absolutely horrific, the amount of calls that are made on a daily basis to that. So
Correct.
that's another charity that I wholeheartedly support here as well.
Yeah. I'm wondering if there's the equivalent kids helpline in the US, because I know in Australia that the volume of calls they get are phenomenal, and it's a wonderful resource for Australian children to call in about any subject that is troubling them and receive and have someone to talk to, get some counselling and advice, and it's a free service. And they can ring in any time they want. So that's a wonderful thing for Australia.
Yeah, in
one
Australia,
of our listeners.
Sorry, I'm just going to finish off on that. I'll finish off on that line. Is that one of the major real estate groups here in Australia, the First National Real Estate Group. They have always been big sponsors of major things. They used to be what they call a humanity partner for Red Cross a number of years ago, donating millions of dollars to that foundation. They've now put all their own internal thing. They have a thing there called the foundation, sending all the money into Kids Helpline because they see it as something so important. And also, kids are obviously, as we all say, are our future, and we're looking to make a better future with more happier kids along the way. So First National Real Estate is a major contributor to that fund as well.
Yeah. So one of our listeners, I'll go to the second question first before I go back to the other question. So one of our listeners is saying that in the US they have a thing called the Boys and Girls Club, and they're not sure if that's what is the same. But if in Australia it's a 1-800 phone line that the children or anyone under 18, generally speaking, they can call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It's free to call and someone will answer the phone and talk to them. So if that's what the equivalent in the US is, they're not sure that's the same thing. So going back to an earlier question, one of our listeners wanted to know about good relationships and how can you tell so we were speaking about online bullying and developing good relationships, and one of our listeners wants to know how can you tell if it's good relationships. So do you want to have a go at that first, Greg?
Yeah, sure. I think good relationships are born out of things that become a two-way street, and I think it's an option whereby what you put out is what you kind of get back. And if you're a person who's very much what I would call self-aware, and you're definitely in the space of genuinely looking to help others, so therefore your intent is about helping others and not so about the intent purely being on yourself, there will be a warmth or an acceptance of you as a person, and therefore you'll be able to be more attractive, so to speak, to another party. And when you get that feeling back as well, you kind of know that you've got so. I mean, I've been fortunate in my life of having some good relationships with people, work and professionally. I have, even that as we speak now, there are people that in around me that, I know I can call upon. We have terrific connections. They know a lot about me.
Yes.
We might talk on a business sense about some planning and construction and organisation, those kind of things. And reciprocally, I hope that they get the feeling that, I'm interested in them. And generally we are. We know each other's families, that kind of thing. We have interest in what's going on in our lives. And I said it's about, it's the same when you're in business. It's about looking at how can I best help, how can I best serve somebody else. And, if nothing comes back, then so be it. But it's a great approach to have rather than all be about yourself.
Yes, and from my perspective too, when you're talking about good relationships, there has to be that reciprocal element. So if you're the one doing all the giving and you're not getting anything in return, so and that's in terms of friendship, help. It should be, good relationships should be a two-way street. It shouldn't be just you doing everything for the other person, or always being the listener, or always being the one to help. A good relationship should have reciprocal benefits. In other words, they give back to you, they help you, they talk to you. So it really is about that two-way street. And that's very important for a good relationship. A one-sided relationship isn't something that I would describe as a good relationship. Would you, Greg?
Oh, absolutely not. And that goes down from, basically general friendships right through to, love and marriages and all those kind of things.
Yes.
You're working at those. And the people who, in brackets, work at this thing on a consistent basis will get the most reward in their life. It's like in a good marriage. You've got to be able to get up to your spouse and, be into them, compliment them. Yes, it does take a little bit of work. Yes, it does take a little bit of effort, particularly as time goes on and we become more familiar and, in brackets, maybe a little bit more stale. But it can't be a one-sided effect. If I think there was a movie, I'm Just Not Into You or something like that. It was one of the sort of throwaway lines from it. That's a little bit how relationships work. And, you can obviously, when you're in public or something, you can feel if something is good, and you can see that in there. But, unfortunately, that for a lot of people, there's that sort of difference and a little bit of standoffishness between each other that never quite fully gels. But keep on working. If the person was asking about that, keep on working at it. Give the very best that you can be, and obviously go on the basis of you trying to help that particular person. And if it's not reciprocal enough down the track, then you need to make a decision, because you also have got to be fueled and fulfilled in the relationship yourself.
One of our listeners wants to know, what if it seems like a good working relationship, but it's just a farce? What an interesting question.
No, let me just, I didn't quite hear. A good working relationship, but just what?
But it's just a farce. So it appears that there's a good relationship, but it's just a pretense.
Look, again, I think that sort of stuff becomes a little bit more self-evident. If someone seems to be trying ways or whatever, but you can start to, what's the word, sift out, smell out the non-genuineness in something. If it's,
and then it's a matter of,
I think, sorry, you keep going.
Then it's a matter of distancing yourself. If it seems to be on a good relationship on some level, but if it's not working for you, then that's probably something that, even if it's okay, you should probably distance yourself if there's an element of fakeness in there, don't you think?
Yeah, and I think the fakeness comes out in a generalised way, whereby it becomes quite evident that person is in the relationship purely for the benefit of themselves. So they, let's say there's a boss and a subordinate working there, and all of a sudden there are your comments going on social media and, wow, you're great, you're the best boss I've ever had, and all that kind of stuff. It would be perceived that they may not think that, but they would be kind of working to hopefully get themselves a promotion or something to that kind of nature. And I think that over time will show themselves. If you've got a good, solid, genuine heart and you're in it for the right reason, you'll always, be a winner, and it'll grow, and it'll mushroom from there on out. If there is a slight bit of doubt and there's stuff going on, then those relationships get exposed over time.
Yes. some comments from our listeners. There are some people out there that will not be so nice in relationships, and some people thrive on the pain of others, so they master the craft of being sneaky. So that ties in with a little of what we've been talking about in relationships. So I've got some other questions I really wanted to ask you this morning, so I'll get on with those.
Sure. Yep.
When did it dawn on you that you wanted to be a writer?
Okay. As I said initially in the piece, way back in the 80s and probably the early 90s, I always wanted to write and dabble. An outside kind of thing, I used to see documentaries on television or whatever, and they filmed famous writers, and one was Patricia Cornwell, for example, in the US. Yes. She writes more CSI type crime thrillers, and I specifically remember her coming out of her estate in her, I think it was a Ferrari at the time, with the interviewer in the car, and I thought to myself, I wouldn't mind a bit of that. Yeah. So that was kind of fuel, but it was just the overall sense of wanting to put some words down, be creative, and that's why I started to do things like blogging and also emailing. Yes. I found I can express myself in a more genuine sense like that, and it's fuel, but the fear of actually putting that into a book, and what would that look like? Would somebody accept me? Would I be laughed at? Probably a bit of the reason why I went, will they ever read it? All those kind of things. And you procrastinate, and you think, how long is this going to take? Will it take weeks? Will it take months? Could it take years? And we kind of put things off. It's a bit like trying to sign up to go and get another degree at university. In hindsight, it's only 3 years or something to get a degree. And when we look back, we think, wow, let's just look back now to 2016. It seems like it was just yesterday. But when we're looking forward, those things seem so far away. So, but I always wanted to do that, express it, because I also get a connection with people. You see, I have a really genuine interest in listening to other people's stories, and that's one of the great loves I have now, because I have over 10,000 people on an email list that we converse with every week. I send them things, quite a few people will reply back, and I love to hear their stories as well. It's a really, really interesting way to live.
Do their stories inspire you to keep writing?
Oh, absolutely. I enjoy listening to their own personal stories. I mean, I get ideas from some of their stories that they would tell me. Again, one of my readers grew up. Her father was, for want of a better word, a foot soldier within the mafia. I'm very polite to her.
I'm sure.
But the stories of inspirations I occasionally run what we call a reader story month thing, and I will spotlight the reader, maybe some of their old photos, what they did. A lot of my readers are also retired, so they give me what they did in their working life, and I get some photos of one particular gentleman that comes to mind. He was a motorcycle policeman in the US, and he was sitting on his bike with all his gear on, and I think it was shot again in the 70s or 80s. Had these big, what we call mutton chop sideburns on, and it just sort of it's I don't know, it's an exciting thing, and I said I love the stories. They definitely inspire me.
Another question from our listener. Have you had any negative things come up from your writing?
Negative things only in the sense of, getting some bad reviews, I suppose. It's quite obvious that not everyone's going to love what you write, how you write, and all that kind of thing. So very early in the piece, I would get, some negative reviews, what we call like 1-star reviews, and it used to upset me. I'd read them and I'd take them to heart, But it got to a point that I no longer, and even today, I no longer read my reviews, whether they're good or bad. Because, again, I block it out. What I've worked out is that people who give 1-star reviews are typically, and it's a generalization, but they're a little bit angry with themselves, and this is the way that they're going to become the hero of the minute and have most times not even their own name. They are an anonymous, and they can get that appearing on your Amazon reviews, and and that's fine. The best reviews that I get are somewhere around that 3-4 star kind of area, because they're genuine, and if they've got a little gripe or something like that, they put it in there and say, well, perhaps this story could be made a little bit longer, perhaps you could go a little bit more depth with the character or something of that nature, and that's good feedback. 1-star people are not good feedback. Yeah, it is. No. But 1-star people are not. They offer nothing. And so I choose to just totally ignore them and go on. And, similarly, 5 stars, they're very flat. But, the best reviews are 3 or 4 stars. But if you're listening to the station, I love 5 stars. You don't need to go and buy any books today and swamp me full of 3 stars.
One of our listeners is saying you can't please everyone all of the time, and that's true.
That's very, very true. Yeah.
Another question from our listeners: Are they hoping you write a story about them? So I think that's in reference to talking when we were talking about your listeners and your readers and your email ship interacting with you. So, yes, I think you do grab a bit of character reference from the people that you associate with. Next question from our listeners.
Let me just quickly answer that last one. I've also run a competition online to my readers and said, listen, I'm bringing out a new book. I need to get the name of the perpetrator and whatever. Let's run a competition. And if I pick your name out, I'll send you the printed copy of the book when it's done, signed and whatever. And if I use maybe some of the other names along the way, then I'll send you some other copies or digital copies or things like that. And I got a tremendous response. I think when I actually drew the name out of the hat, I did it live via video. I've had 5, 6, 7,000 views on that site alone, and on that particular video, and people love it. And yes, the barber has the central character, which is James Carrigan, and he is the name that was picked out by one of my readers.
From your competition. Oh, well done. I've got another question before we throw to the break. Just one more question. Have you ever voiced an audiobook, Greg?
No, I've looked into doing audiobooks, and there are 2 main things on it. In Australia, it's quite an expensive thing to do, and I'm still trying to find a good source. Now, in the United States, Amazon, as readers may know, own the company called Audible. However, to record on Audible, you need to be an American citizen or have an American address. Now, I've been able to establish that in recent times, whereby I have via Australia, I have an American address. And I've looked at doing it. I've actually been on Audible, and I've even to some extent interviewed some people to play characters within my books. I haven't pressed the button yet, but in saying that, maybe this is what your reader is asking me, would I personally record the book? Because they are set in Australia, and they will have an Australian twang to them rather than an American or a British sounding voice. So, hey, it's on the cards. It's just another project that I've got to get down and get done amongst my fairly busy schedule already.
Yes. Her listener saying, talk to me after the show. I may be able to help you with that.
Why not? I'm all ears.
Absolutely. Yeah. So So in this chat box, I'll put up Greg's email at the end of the show so that you guys can have a chat. Now, we've got to throw to a quick break. Greg, can I keep you for another little segment after this break? Have you got
Tony,
time?
I'm all yours. All yours.
Fantastic. All right,
All
Rebel,
right.
we'll throw to a quick break, and after we come back, we'll have another chat with Greg. Okay, over to you, Rebel. Welcome back, listeners. You're listening to Toni Lontis, and today we have the wonderful Greg Reid online with us. Greg is a best-selling author of mystery crime, and we were asking him all sorts of questions today, and I've had some wonderful questions from our listeners, but I've got one for Greg now. So, Greg, tell me, what advice would you give to your younger self?
Good question, Tony. Good question. If I was to go back all of those years, the years seem to be getting longer. If I was to go back all those years, I would definitely tell myself that I need to, one, believe in myself. That would be an important thing because without that internal belief and having that inner strength, then your life, I think, becomes pretty difficult. So go about, believing in yourself would be a key thing. The second thing I would look at talking about is to have the resilience and the, again, I suppose it's the belief, but I would also talk about playing to my own strengths and being authentic in whatever I did. Yes. So what I mean by that is even from today's in a book sense, when I first started writing and I was in a group, most of the writers around me, and I know from your books yourself, Toni, that you write much bigger novels than I do. And there are writers who write 50,000, 80, 100, 120,000 plus words. And I was never that kind of writer. I was what we call a short reader, a short novella, writing 10, 12, 15,000 words. And I used to feel a little bit inept. But the strength was that I could write short reads at a relatively quick pace, get the books into the market. And luckily enough for me, people found them and they read them. And some of them read them so much of them, they became number one bestsellers in their category. And so that was then confirmation that the strength that I had was that. So for a younger person, I would say, do whatever your strength is. I said I talked to a particular a colleague, who has a son out there, and he's very much into flying drones. And it's such an upcoming kind of thing. We think of all the ads, and we know Amazon's going to be bringing programs in where they're going to deliver product and services via drones. And I know there's a major pizza companies are bringing drones into their delivery. And I say to him, wow, that's a terrific thing. Keep that career going, and who knows where it might take you. He might become the head of drone operations for Amazon one day. So, it's exciting. Do what you like to do best.
It's about discovering your strengths early in life, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It's looking at, but having that solid belief. And I said, continuing, the belief is a big thing because we all face a number of hurdles over time. We've got the object to either give up and walk away and quit. We can sort of, try and bash our way through and keep on going. Or at the very least, we need to sidestep and go around the outside of that so-called brick wall barrier and keep on moving forward. But the point is that we have to keep on moving forward. And those who stick at something long enough, can and typically will become winners no matter what they're doing.
Yeah. I've got lots of questions coming in, Greg. So the first one is it hard to be a writer in this day and age?
Look, I think at the moment there are conflicting reports out there. You'll pick up a newspaper or something and it'll say, hey, the writing market's diminishing, the book market's diminishing, the typical bookstore in the corner is closing and all that kind of thing. And surely, yes, there is a lot more competition in the world because there are people like myself and obviously like yourself there too, Toni, who have now got into the writing space and we're starting to crowd that up. However, on the flip side, there's now opportunity because in the good old days when you had to write a huge big manuscript, post it off to some anonymous person sitting in a New York high-rise
right.
with a cravat on and a glass of brandy, smoking their cigars, and then throwing your manuscript into the bin, and you becoming despondent, is not the only way to go now. Amazon changed the game so much that you, and I mean you, as in you, Toni, the writer, and myself, have been given an opportunity where we can write a book, put it in a correct format, upload it to Amazon, and basically anywhere between 12 and 72 hours later, we are published authors. And, it's fabulous. So is it more difficult to become a writer? There's possibly chances, but the opportunities to be a writer are far greater. And if you take the concept of writing and marketing, you will succeed at it.
Yeah. Lots of questions coming in. So the next one is, are you self-published? That's a yes for me. Over to Greg.
I'm a hybrid. So what that means is I am predominantly self-published. I publish through Amazon as my uploading dimension, but I also have a publisher in the United Kingdom, in the UK, that publishes my novel, Murder Secret. They distribute through major bookstores there, Waterstones, W.H. Smith, Foyles, etc. And they're doing a tremendous job. I also run a publishing contract in India with another group. They're called Juggernaut Books. So I'm what they call a bit of a hybrid. I love self-publishing, though. Don't take anything away from self-publishing. It's a brilliant forum, fantastic medium. And the best thing about it is that you have control of what you do. So if you're in the audience today wanting to become a writer, go down the self-publishing route by a country mile. Amazon are the kings, and that's where you should be self-publishing your book to. Yes.
Next question. How is it so different with these smaller reads? So I guess that the listener wants to know, I'm guessing that they want to know the difference between your typical book or novel and your smaller read books.
Yeah. The smaller reads are based on the fact that they obviously of the size. So I wrote them specifically for two types of audiences: those who are voracious readers who need a lunchtime hit in the park while having their lunch or sitting on a bus. And secondly, the person who is a non-reader who walks to a bookstore and sees a 300, 400, 500-page novel and goes, I'll never do that. So I'm trying to break non-readers into becoming readers. Now, the difference is they are short, fast, punchy. There is character in there, but not super in-depth. I mean, I will do my best to give you a little snippet of what Jack Creed is like, but I can better do that through a novel because I've got more pages to fill, for want of a better word. That's the main difference between a short read. They're generally very, very fast-paced. We open the first page, the murder has already occurred. They might only run 40, 50 pages in length. So as you can see, I can't go into depth too much about, how Jack grew up and all his little nuances. But in a novel, I can do that. Yeah.
Yes. Do your smaller reads from one story to the next, we're talking about Jack, your central character. If they read from one novel to the next, they're going to glean a greater depth about his character than you would by... You can just read one book, but if you read the books one after the other, you'll gradually... Yes, you'll gain that knowledge about the character Jack in more depth.
Correct.
So that's quite a strength of smaller reads.
Yeah, all my books are standalones, and they're different stories. They're not cliffhangers that sort of lead to the next book, but typically within each book there's something that will get more exposed. Jack, as I said, is a toughie. He's anti-establishment. He's all that kind of stuff. Drives the Mustang or whatever. But on the other side, Jack's also a softie. He's a family man, but because of the way he lives, he actually lives away from his family by I'm talking about an hour distance and driving. He has a daughter, for example, who suffers mental health issues, and so you see the softer side, the concern, the father coming out in various stories along the way as some of those other situations play out. So people do get a better understanding.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've got another question. How can a person find their strengths? Another good question.
I think you find the strengths based off the way that you, I don't know, the things that you like that seem to give you the best fulfillment and the best, I don't know, even external responses, but they also comes from within. It's a thing that you kind of like to do.
It's
so,
about.
So, yeah, please go on, Toni.
It's about sitting with yourself and thinking, okay, I do that well because someone's told me, or it gives me a sense of fulfillment, or I feel happy when that's how you work out those strengths in your life, isn't it?
It is, and I think it's something that you.
Yourself.
Yeah, it's the area that you gravitate to the most. It's something that you like to talk about, for example, or an action you like to do. I think that you've got to look at your strengths as those things that are naturally innate within you. They're not something that you have to think that you should be good at. For example, as I talk about the books, there are a lot of people who write fantastic long books. And sure, I wish I had the ability some stages to do that. But my strength, where I've gained the access to is, and the ability to sell thousands and thousands of books each month is the fact that my books are short, fast, and whatever. You need to look at that. Don't pull something on based on the think of what you think everyone else needs, or pull it on because you think that's where a financial gain opportunity is. I'll be quite honest. Short reads are a struggle on the financial basis because they have to be sold at a cheaper level as well. Yes. So, if I was purely in this for the big money of it all, then obviously I would only ever write long-term novels because, that I can sell them at a higher price. But I also love the fact, the strength is that they are out there. It does give me recognition, which fuels my internal thing. Yes. And I build relationships with people, which are so exciting for me. I go back to the thing. I'm building stories with people, and I just love doing that.
Yes. So, Greg, I'm not going to throw to a break. I'm going to stay with you if that's okay. I've got some more comments and questions. So,
sure.
One of our listeners says, you need to tune out the negative words of others that say the things you need to tune out the negative words of others that say the things you like will not get you any place. And then the next one, lots of parents quash the dreams of their kids. And that's a comment. And the next question is, are there any old-time publishers anymore, and why would anyone choose to go that way if you can self-publish? Another good question.
Yeah, no, that's a terrific question. Cutting out the negative words of what others say, that's obviously a good field. Now, we can't say that we live in a world that's so easy to do that, and I'm in the same spot. Someone will say some negative things, and they will resonate with the world. The speed of me recovering is the far better way to do it, and standing back up and keeping going. That's why no matter what you have, you need to have some kind of vision within your life that keeps you going forward. This is not a sprint.
It's about
this thing called life. It's called a marathon.
And
we just got to keep on working forward. And I know that's philosophical and sounds easy, but you need to have the inner strength. It's more important what you say to yourself, because if you're looking for external pleasure from external sources, you are always going to be able to, in some format, experience pain. If you're able to fuel your inner drive, then you are in control of what that's all about. And I read a terrific book a number of years ago, and I'm trying to recall the name of it. What You Say When You Talk to Yourself, that's roughly the title. It's by a guy called Dr. Shem Halsetter. It's not your typical motivational, inspirational book. It actually gives you step-by-step guides on what to say and how to say it. And I think there's some great exercises in that book. If you're struggling with those negative inner thoughts, I'm sorry I don't have the correct title, but What You Say When You Talk to Yourself is something like the title.
It's about self-talk.
self-talk, and that's a brilliant thing. The other part of that question was talking about why do people go to traditional publishers when you can self-publish. It's typically an ego thing. Let me be frank. Yes. One of the hardest difficulties about being a self-publisher is getting yourself into a bookstore. Bookstore owners typically won't have you in there unless you've been published by a big name, because they believe that the big-time publishers will have heavily scrutinised the book. They will have edited it exceptionally well. The cover will be extremely professional. What's not seemingly apparent to some of these people is that people like myself and you, Toni, we do have professional editors. I've got editors in the United States. I have a fantastic editor here in Australia. I get all my covers. Yeah, you do too. I know you do. We get professionally done covers based on research. We understand what our categories are requiring, and we get those professionally done. And so we produce a high quality product that can easily compete with that of a publishing house. But it's the perception, and therefore it stifles us getting into bookstores. But when you're with a big-time publisher, you can be in there. And let's be honest, for us readers, we want to be standing in an airport like you and I were just doing. You were in Bali. I was in Singapore until early this week myself. And we want to be able to stand at that airport and go, hey, that's my book. That's my book, you know.
My book.
But the world's changing. I've just signed a brand new contract yesterday.
Agree.
And I signed a brand new contract yesterday with a bookstore, Toni, on the Gold Coast where you live. And we're going to distribute some of my books into that store, starting next week or the week later. So the world is changing in that aspect as well.
Yes, and I'm glad to hear that. More questions coming in. Does Amazon mean self-published? Not necessarily, but
not necessarily. There are a number of ways. Self-published just basically means that you write a book. You typically write it in what we call Word, in a Word document, and then you upload it to a distribution business. Amazon is by far the biggest in the world. It has the most reader population there. There are hundreds of millions of people looking for books at any one time. Yes. But there are other distributors. There's Barnes & Noble. There is Kobo. There are other imprints around from other brands throughout the world that will take your books and you can publish. I have selected purely to stick with Amazon based on the volume that they provide me.
And
that's the way to go. But self-publishing is anything you can do. I mean, you could go out and just print your own books and sell them at a book fair or something to that nature if you wanted to do that. Yes. But Amazon is the distribution outlet.
So the next question is, do you have to copyright your work before going to Amazon? So let me interpret that. I think that's a question around editing. Do you have to edit your work before going to Amazon? I'll let you answer that, Greg.
Well, I definitely have everything edited. I said initially when I started off as a writer, and funds are tight and you're not sure how it's going to go, I thought I could read my own work, 6, 7, 8, 10 times and pick up all the mistakes. I quickly learnt that wasn't the case, and I got caned heavily for that with a few number one ratings. So, yes, having things editing. Also, I have a copyright clause at the front of all my books that basically says that you can't use or whatever the words. I consult with a lawyer, but I've never had an issue where I've had to try and force a rule on that. When I work with other people, let's say I work with a cover designer or something like that, I set up what we call a non-disclosure agreement, an NDA, which basically means they can't use my art designs on any of their other work. So I try and protect myself a little bit. It's probably not foolproof, and I'm probably a major number one hitter in Bangladesh at the moment, and I don't know about it. So.
Okay. More questions coming in. Would you say this would work for an erotic writer as well? Great question.
150 million %. Yeah, it's let me tell our erotic writer that romance in general is the largest genre on the self-published world, Amazon, by a country mile. Crime is the number 2 genre as far as sales go.
Yes.
Within romance, you have so many different areas. You have basically from clean right through to whatever.
Yes.
And erotica, with all its subgenres of the LBGT groups and etc., also performs exceptionally well. So if you are an erotic writer,
go for it.
Go for it and get to understand how to market is my other key point for you there.
Yeah.
So you can get your books found.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Next question is, so do you have to read your books sequentially? I'll let you answer that.
No, they're all freestanding. As I said, it's based on volume and being able to get books quickly into a market to fill a particular need. What I have done over time is I will grab, let's say, 4 books and I'll put them together and I'll call it a box set, and that gives a little bit more volume. So I typically will then take those books to print because they've got a bit more thickness in them, albeit they may be 150, they may be 200 pages plus, but then they gives the reader the option to read them as I think they've performed very, very well. Yes. If you give me 2 seconds, I need to have a quick brag because it's my best story.
Absolutely.
Is that back in 2015, in about the middle of the year, July, August, September time, I boxed the very first 4 Jack Creed books I made. I call it the Detective Jack Creed box set number 1. And I put it into the market. Yeah. It went number 1 in Britain and the US for 83 of 90 days straight. But the interesting thing was I outsold a guy called Peter James, who has sold in excess of 20 million books. I outsold Anne Cleves, who, if listeners understand, she's behind the television series like Vera and Shetland, for example. Yes. I outsold Jeffrey Archer, who's been a very well-credentialed author in his time, and I even outsold a pre-release by Stephen King within that genre. Now, it was only 83 of 90 days, but it's my best one, and I just had to get that little brag out because, you can read them any way you like, but it's a kind of a series that goes on. Yeah.
Yeah. More questions coming in. Don't they have self-published books in bookstores? I'll let you answer that, Greg.
Look, they do to some extent, but it is more difficult. What I found that in regional bookstores in an area, for example, my books, as Toni is aware, are situated about an hour from where I personally live, probably about half an hour or so from where Toni lives in a state called New South Wales, in the northern part of the state. Now, bookstores down there, I know, do take on some independent writers who write books about the local town or something to that kind of nature, but they don't take a lot on. They might take 3 or 4. When we're thinking of walking into a bookstore and we see a James Patterson novel, front and centre, they are obviously produced by the major publishing houses, and that's what sells. Bookstores have got to sell books too, of course, and they've got to go for what will sell for them. So, yes, the answer to your question is yes, there are some, but it's extremely difficult to get in unless you have a major publisher behind you.
Extraordinary difficult to get into bookstores without a publisher behind you. How much do your books sell for, a listener wants to know?
If they were to go onto Amazon and just put my name in there, C.T. Mitchell, you'll find my little author profile and you'll find all my books. Typically, all my short books, all my short reads in ebook format sell at 99 cents. I will box.
How's that, listeners? 99 cents for one of Greg's books. Just type in C.T. Mitchell into Amazon and you'll have all his wonderful books to see.
Yeah. And they can go up to generally $2.99, $4.99. Yeah.
Yeah. So not a huge investment for a great little read. One of our listeners says, this sounds wonderful. You have inspired me. Can people get your books in other countries? And I believe your books are available all over the world, Greg?
Worldwide. Here's the other benefit for someone being on on your call today, Tony. If they want to sample C.T. Mitchell, all they got to do is go to ctmitchellbooks.com and you'll have a little pop-up that says subscribe to my newsletter. Have no fear about your name being passed around or used or abused or whatever. Merely leave me your name and your email and you will be given a free ebook to read. It was also a number one bestseller. So you're not getting any rubbish. I'm giving you one of my best. You will get some little emails from me.
And they're great books.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. And we'll have conversations along the way. You can unsubscribe at any stage. So that's a way to sample me out. You can start with the freebies, and then if you like it, you'll be able to find my other books in and around. But they are worldwide, correct?
So quickly, we're down to our last couple of minutes. So would you see your books in the millions? I'm thinking that they're wanting to know how many books you've sold, number one. Number two, do you have box sets? And number three, I'm asking so I know I've pulled up the right ones.
Yeah, sure. So book sets, my sales are in the hundreds of thousands. I sell multiple thousands per month on Amazon. Obviously the free book is the biggest seller. It's over its time. It's been downloaded over 100,000 times. Typically on a very good month, there might be about 12,000 sales going through on a month on those. But yes, I do blocks a lot of the sets. So you can get things like Detective Jack Creed box set 1. You can get another book that's called Dead Set, which is all 7 Jack Creed books, short reads put into one book. So it's called Dead Set. You'll get all the 7 reads. It's about a 300-odd page read in there. My cozies are also boxed. So Lady Margaret Turnbull, there's a box set out of her called Murder in the District. There's also a couple of other cozies by Kate McKenzie. There's a box set out of those called Deadly Mix. So I think that takes 5 or 6 stories there.
Lots of box sets.
There's a lot of box sets, and these take, I've had 60, 70 reviews on these, averaging about 4.5 on those cozy box sets. So they seem to be popular enough. And the final question was about, I forgot now, sorry.
Well, I was just going to say, I'm terribly sorry, Greg, and our wonderful listeners. We've been so busy this morning that we're just about out of time. So I'm going to have to say thank you so much to our listeners today. What a fabulous session. What wonderful questions. Thank you, Greg, for your time and staying with me all show so that we could get through all of our questions. Now, Greg's website, ctmitchellbooks.com, for all of his books, his email newsletter that will come out, and any of the free books that Greg has available. That's ctmitchell.books.com, and I will put that up on the chat box. And it's time to go, so thank you, everyone. Thank you so much, Greg, and I'll see you all next week for another Radio Tony.